Okay.
Shadows settle on the place you left. Our minds are troubled by the emptiness. Destroy the middle, it's a waste of time. From the perfect start to the finish line.
Dear native youth, I wrote this song for you, cause I wanted you to know that I put my heart into. I get inspired every time that I speak to you. I can acknowledge all the things that you're going through, and trust me when I say that I've been in your shoes. Locked up before for breaking all of the rules. I felt alone, so I posted up in my room with thoughts of suicide. I don't know what to do, I'm so confused. If I end it all, who's gon' care? Picture my funeral, who's all there? That constant feeling of despair, zoned out with a blank stare. In that moment, I'm trying to decide my fate with war paint written all across my face. The ancestors fought hard and never gave up this easily, so I find something deep inside of me to my dream or your family. Thanks for believing in me. Together with you, we gon' make some history.
Shadows settle on the place you left. Our minds are troubled by the emptiness. Destroy the middle, it's a waste of time. From the perfect start to the finish line.
Dear native youth, yes, I'm still talking to you. I promise you only the truth, that's all I know how to do. Too many years of constant being lied to, I know how you feel. You probably had it up to here, and take a moment from wiping the stairs. Close your eyes for a second, imagine you no longer living in fear. Keep your head above the clouds and know it gets better from here. Pretend for 1 second, Pop's putting down the beer as he puts arms around you so you can feel how love heals. How love heals, how love heals. It's not your fault, that love for your life, it just disappears. It disappears, it disappears. I know the pain suffocates and takes you to a distant place. A youth among all experience the highest rate. We gotta promise we will never let the youth fade away. This is more than Twitter hashtags, dear native youth.
Shadows settle on the place you left. Our minds are troubled by the emptiness. Destroy the middle, it's a waste of time. From the perfect start to the finish line.
Dear native youth.
Brian, let's go ahead and get started.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. We are building a community. Please introduce yourself in the chat and let your fellow participants know your name, tribal affiliation, if applicable, job title, and organization. Everyone will be muted until the participant reflections portion of the hour. During that segment, please use the raise my hand icon on Zoom, or the host will unmute you to offer your reflection. You will receive a link to the recording and presentation by the end of the week. And continuing education information, this activity is jointly provided by USET and Cardia Services. The requirements are that successful completion of this activity includes attending the entire CE activity, completing the online evaluation, and submitting an online CE request within 2 weeks of the event. And if you have any questions or concerns, just email Paige O'Sullivan at cardiaservices.org. And there are no disclosures to disclose.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to all my relations. Mitakue Oyase. We are all related in the Sioux language. I am Bernice UP Jordan. I am a citizen of the Port Peck Sioux Nation. I'm a public health program manager with THPS at USET. Next slide. So we want to recognize that you are on Indigenous land. To learn and acknowledge what tribal nation land you are or your organization is standing on, you can go ahead and click on this website, or you can enter your zip code to this number. Next slide. So our reclaiming community growth, we are connecting our Indigenous community. So this data is from the 2023 registration. So every dot represents a collective story from more than just that area. Thank you for being a part of these stories. Next slide. And I'd like to welcome now Holly Echohawk, Senior Behavioral Health Advisor. She's going to go ahead and take it from here. Holly?
Hello, everybody. Holly Echohawk here. Super happy to see you again for our May Reclaiming Psychological Brilliance session. Today, we're going to talk about healing Native family trauma related to drug and alcohol use. And we have two parts. So today, we're going to have a conversation about healing Native families. And then next month in June, we're going to do part 2 of the same topic. So, and the conversation is going to be with myself and my good friend, Dr. Art Martinez. So let's go to the next slide and I'll go over the learning objectives real quickly. So of course, our first learning objective every month is always to increase knowledge and awareness of the fabulous innate intelligence that Native people have and the relationship to our ability to use our innate intelligence to heal. We also today are going to talk about ways to increase your understanding of the impact of unresolved trauma. We're going to deepen awareness of substance use on how our brains function and how that results in different kinds of behavior and unhealthy behavior. And then we're also going to talk about how cultural traditions assist with trauma recovery and family healing. So the next slide, I have 10 slides I'm going to go through really quickly. You will receive a copy of all of this. But the reason I'm going to go through them quickly is because we want to get to the conversation with Art Martinez. So we wanted to have this topic for this month and next month because trauma and family disruption are pretty common to everybody. I actually don't know of any Native family where trauma has not disrupted family functioning and resulted in many cases in family breakups. So it's all too common. And one of the points I want to make is that, we talk about our brilliance as Native people, and the strengths that we have, but our natural strengths and our innate intelligence, it gets compromised by episodes of alcohol, drugs, and the behavior that comes out of drug use and alcoholism. So the next slide. Trauma obviously is a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. It could be one time, it could be ongoing, and I gave you some examples there. And sometimes trauma gets overlooked because it's more subtle, like a physical health emergency, the death of a favorite relative. I know all of us have experienced that. People getting humiliated, and of course, being bullied. And trauma responses can show up in lots of different ways. And the reason I want to show you this, not that you don't already know it, but I want you to think about this in terms of family functioning. So you can see that trauma some common trauma responses. People either they might deny it. Some people might get really angry. A lot of people have self-blame and feel shame about the trauma that they've experienced. Of course, feeling really sad, being agitated, kind of always being on edge, kind of always looking around, thinking something's going to happen again. And then just the physical tension that is a common trauma response. So the next slide is about the different forms that trauma exposure takes many forms. And, obviously you can be a survivor, you personally have experienced some terrible trauma, but you're a survivor. You might have just witnessed it. This happens to many children in homes that have an explosive part to their day-to-day life. And so even just witnessing trauma can really make a young child easily flinch, which is terrible. All different kinds of trauma, natural disasters, sexual abuse, traumatic grief, violence in your community. So many different forms of trauma. So you take all of those basic fundamentals about trauma and you add to that the unique tribal experiences of historical trauma and the impact that has had quietly, but sometimes very much a disruption to healthy Native families. You see lateral violence play out in tribal communities where people are mean to each other, whether it's in the community or in the office setting. Really vicious gossip is an example of lateral violence. Talking bad about people is often in tribal communities can be an example of lateral violence. And of course, the complexity of Native trauma and trauma experience is unique and needs a lot of special attention. So the next slide, I just want to mention the ACE surveys, and to give you a citation. Native people score higher on the adverse childhood experiences than other non-Native populations. And there's more and more work and study being done on the impact of adverse childhood experiences and trauma experiences to later higher rates of chronic disease, physical health impacts. So, and then the higher ACE scores for Native people are associated with higher rates of suicide and higher rates of psychological distress. The next slide is about, alcohol use has never gone away in Native communities, and continues in a lot of Native communities to be kind of the number one factor of unhealthy behavior, erratic behavior, disruption in the community. So that sadly has never gone away. In some communities it has, but it's pretty common in lots of other places, and you all know this. But you add to that the new influx of drugs that have come into Native communities, and that just, boom, raise the distress in a lot of communities much higher. And of course, there's really complicated reasons that people turn to alcohol and drug use. Often it starts out as self-medicating, people suffering from grief and loss, lots of different reasons. It's complicated. But there continues to be limited treatment and recovery options in a lot of tribal communities. And you good people on the call, are in there on the front lines, being that treatment provider and providing that recovery option in your communities. But what happens in families, which is what we're talking about, the fracturing of Native families, is it often results from alcoholic or binge behavior. In a lot of Native families, as you're a child growing up, you see really odd things, and it's not normal to see somebody laying on the kitchen floor, right? It's not normal to have somebody kick out a wall or break a door. Not normal. but you see unusual things as a child growing up in some communities and some families. And it results in higher, certainly an always kind of on edge fear, high anxiety, sometimes really rageful behavior in the child, always wanting to avoid scary situations. And then sometimes you see the young people really can be very angry at their parent or their whoever it is, the adult or adults. But this new influx, which isn't that new now, I suppose it has been a while, but the terrible influx is a better way to put it, of opiate, fentanyl, and methamphetamine in tribal communities have really exacerbated family fracturing, family breakups, anger among family members. So the next slide I want to show you is the impact, an example of the impact of opiates and painkillers on the brain. So just as one example, we're really fortunate. Creator blessed all of us with these fabulous brains. If you think about what the brain does, and every brain cell is very complicated, but opiates activate when someone is taking opiates. It activates several parts of your brain system, including the part of your brain that makes you want more of the drug. So once you start taking opiates, that part of your brain is activated and it always wants more. And at the same time, that same drug alters the part of your brain that makes you want to stop using the drug. So in an opiate addiction, those two brain processes work in combination. They're working simultaneously. And the effect of that, not being able to stop and wanting more, it's like pushing on the gas pedal in your car and you have no brakes. That's an oversimplification, but I just wanted to explain that because, when we have relatives or people in our community that are clearly living in an addiction world, we want them to stop. We want them to stop doing that, straighten up, get better, act right. And if they are in an addiction world and their brain these parts of the brain I explained have activated, they can't just stop. It's not that simple. And that's where all of the treatment comes into play. But I just want to make that point. So when we see family members that are behaving terribly or scary or violently or excessive laughing or some abnormal behavior, think about, it's not just their personal will. It's not a willpower thing. Their brain has been altered often, and so they're out of control, and it's connected to their brain. Okay, so the next slide, we're almost done here, is, of course we have protective factors, though, yay. Our culture, our identity, our connectedness to our tribe or family, our traditions. And if you think about in healthy tribal communities, you see what I've been calling kind of silent messaging, right? You see the way you're supposed to behave. You see in ceremonies that you don't see people just running around, wildly. Everything's controlled, behavior's controlled, everything's respectful. So you see that as growing up as well. You see how families are supposed to behave appropriately, and you see that being modeled all the time. And then, of course, we have our wonderful psychological intelligence and our brilliance and our resilience. People talk about historical trauma, and I was working with Albert Titman in California one time, and he and I were talking, and he said, historical trauma is actually historical resilience. And I said, make that a PowerPoint slide, which we did. Okay, so the next slide. And just a word about post-traumatic growth, and it's different than resilience. So resilience is your personal ability to bounce back. Something terrible happens. Let's say you lose your close family member. You know, it's devastating, but you're able to bounce back. You're able to adapt to a different situation over time. That's resilience. Post-traumatic growth is different than that. Post-traumatic growth is often, doesn't always occur, but it can occur, and it certainly has occurred countless times with Native people, is when something rocks you to the core, something incredibly terrible has happened. People in general, and Native people, I believe, you start using your psychological brilliance to struggle to try to make sense out of what happened. And that innate use of our natural intelligence kind of kicks in, and it helps us move out of trauma. And post-traumatic growth is when you come out of the trauma and you move into have some personal growth and empowerment. You think differently. You think, you know, I can get through this. I'm much stronger. It's almost like a validation of change, a positive change in your life that you really hadn't recognized before. So that's the short version of what post-traumatic growth is, and it is different than resilience. Okay, the next slide is and just another thing. This just reiterates what I just said about it, so we don't have to go into that. But post-traumatic growth also comes out of understanding addiction, and of course forgiveness. So enough about that. And then the next slide. And this is just basically saying the same thing, that positive outcomes can come out of trauma, and it's called post-traumatic growth, which is different than post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a negative based kind of diagnosis. But I'm a big fan of post-traumatic growth. So the next slide, and this is the last one. You all know this in your communities, that Native community leaders and Native community members, family members, see the terrible impact that drugs and alcohol have had on their community. So they try to take action. They do different things. Some communities ban alcohol purchases. Some of them, you know, put more money into public education on health risks. Some of them increase their public safety and their tribal police response to drug use. They put more training into their leadership and their tribal police and tribal court systems, child welfare. Some of them have gone so far, this isn't common, but it has happened for sure. Some tribal communities actually banish repeat offenders, people that just continue to be disruptive, continue to bring grief into their community, often violent. Ultimately, some tribal communities will actually banish them. Go away, you can never come back to your community. I'm not saying any of these are right or wrong, but I just want you to know that there are ways that communities have been trying to resist, community resistance activities. So now we're going to get to a funner part of our session today. So the next slide is our break slide. So I want to introduce to you again, and you might remember Dr. Martinez, my friend from last year. He blessed us with joining with Mike Duncan from Native Dads Network, and they did a presentation last summer on Native help declining, and Native help seeking. So now we asked him to come back and have some discussion with me about healing families that have fractured due to drug and alcohol use. So I'll let Art introduce himself first.
Well, thank you, Aku, everyone. My name's Art Martinez. I'm Chumash from Central California area. I've been fortunate enough to serve to help our communities to the best of my abilities, I hope. For Over 40 years, I've served as a clinical psychologist, an expert in traumatic stress for state and tribal courts, and have been fortunate enough also to develop models of care that are currently being used today that help our families to be not only more resilient, but to heal from the effects of traumatic stress as well as substance use. I'm also a certified provider of substance abuse treatment services. So with all that, I will let's just go to the next slide and begin our
Okay.
chat.
So we're doing this a little bit different this time. We thought we'd have a campfire chat with Art and Holly. So just imagine the warmth of that fire. We're sitting outside at night. Art and I are sitting around and we're just going to have a conversation. So I have a series of questions for Art. And as you listen to us, if you have questions or ideas or thoughts, put them in the chat and we'll address some of those at the end. But we also will use your information in the chat for part 2 next month. So let's start. And the next slide is my first question. So, Art, what do psychologically healthy families do well?
Well, there's a there's many characteristics of strength that we look for in families, and I could probably, cite some deep psychological research on families, but we need to go no further than our own ways, our own traditional ways and our own teachings. In a family that is well functioning, we'll find strength. So simply put, that strength is going to appear in many ways. And so we look to our teachings almost in a diagnostic way to see how well that family is functioning. And those are the ways that I use. I shouldn't say, I wouldn't want you to think that probably all psychologists do this, but and so I might begin with, how is love communicated within the family? Love and affection. Now, we would never say, I've never quite seen a family where there is an absence of love or affection within the family. Obviously, the family's still together. But how is that mentored? How is that taught? How is that carried and communicated between one another? That tells me quite a bit about the family. It tells me about the exchange of care that happens within the family and appropriate care. So the dynamics of that can tell us a lot about families. So also in a healthy family, I look at how wisdom is grown. So wisdom is grown by how well is knowledge cherished? How well is knowledge grown? And so think of it as a teaching family environment. And usually that involves many extended family members too. And so there's discussion and there's processing, if you will, around different things that folks are learning. There's sharing. Also, I would look to respect. How is respect revered? How is respect communicated? How is it shown? Oftentimes you can tell that there are many signs of that, everything from how well elders are treated within the family, how well children are treated within the family, and even the animals that are, in essence, family members. How well are they taken care of? So there's an atmosphere of respect that exists in many families, but it's how is that communicated and expressed. And there are many other ways, such as, are people able to be honest within the family? How do they show the strength to one another? How do they show that safety? Bravery. That there are times when we have to have courage. And so that, how is that courage shown? Is that courage different than aggression? Or is that courage something that speaks to the heart? So the heart of the family, for instance, in a family with children, there may be expressions that, you know, it's going to take some courage to learn new things or to go through certain processes. And there's an acceptance of that, and that those are greeted and communicated in a welcoming way, as opposed to something that we are constantly in danger. You know, people are going to come and take our children at any moment, things like that, that might be misguided courage or bravery. And then, of course, truth and humility are big indications of healthy family functioning.
That's fantastic, Art, because what you're describing makes me kind of think about that campfire we started with. A psychologically healthy family is safe, it's warmth, it's support, it's recognizing courage, it's all the factors that people need to grow healthy children to healthy adults. So that's fantastic. So let's go to the next question I have for Dr. Martinez. So what do you see? What's your experience? I mean, how does alcohol and drug use fracture Native families?
Well, there are many ways that the use of alcohol and drugs, and sometimes it's not even dependent use. Oftentimes it can be just use that hasn't been expressed as in a dependent way yet. It alters those communications. It alters the way things happen. And as you can imagine, with someone who struggles with drug or alcohol use or both, what happens? Well, they become very disorganized in the way that they do things. They become hyper emotional about things. They have emotional triggers that maybe they didn't have before, or maybe wouldn't have had. They also have issues of that their substance of choice becomes a predominant choice within their life. And many times that's going to outweigh their family, it's going to outweigh their community obligations, and very importantly, it may outweigh who they were meant to be as a person. So the value that their community and their family, that they could have brought to their community and family, that's going to be set aside for the use of alcohol or drugs or alcohol or drug environments. And so that becomes its own identity, robbing the family and community from those very good attributes that are needed. So if we look at how does that impact the family, well, the family begins to, the person themselves, while they're using, doesn't feel like they're particularly losing anything, and they don't particularly feel like they're they don't see those very issues that I just talked about. The family, on the other hand, is living those very issues that I just talked about. They feel fractured, they feel disorganized, they feel that they're not a priority, that they are, that a substance, they've been replaced by a substance or an experience that doesn't involve them. And then eventually it will involve them if we're not cautious. That the way that the emotion, the way that emotions are expressed in the family becomes very elevated. Things become very dramatic. The family becomes very crisis oriented or disorganized. And so the things that we might call the homeostasis or the balancing factors of the family begin to come apart.
Mhm.
And so post-trauma issues, intergenerational, particularly post-trauma issues, they set the stage for those impacts of drugs and alcohol to take hold in whole new ways that are that will even further fracture the family and the way the family does things.
Let me ask you, Art, play off that a minute, because you talked about the person who's using, dependency or not, drugs or alcohol. It creates the family, and they may not be that aware of it, the user, the person using, but the family lives that disorganization, lives that chaos. So given that, if we go to the next question, please. How are you able to engage the whole family into healing?
Well, remember that when a family is engaged in care, and hopefully they would be, when the family is engaged in care, and let's use some examples. It could be that a family brings their children to care because they are experiencing many behavioral and emotional problems that they can't seem to figure out. Or it could be that a spouse comes to treatment or to care because they want their partner to stop drinking, or they don't know what's going. They've all they know is they've lost control over whatever might be happening within their family. Or you may have the individual themselves come in and say, you know, I'm using and I recognize that this is a problem. It could be that I'm afraid I'm going to lose my family. In any one of those circumstances, it's the person who is coming to you feels completely overwhelmed by the situation of substance use and probably post-trauma issues within their family. And by the way, it's very easy for us as providers to feel just as overwhelmed with them. So we have to be very aware of our own self-care in this process. But there's a huge advantage in that when you have a great deal of needs, you can start anywhere. So however the family comes in, whether it's through the children, the grandmother, the wife, the husband, the user, if you will, whoever that might be, you start with them. And you start in some of the same ways we might take care of ourselves. So you start with their ability to see beyond the game of substance use and the disorganization and the chaos and the hyper emotionality that's going on. And so all of these things begin to, we often will find ourselves saying, well, it's rather than talking about all the people who haven't come here for help, how about we talk about you because you're here, and we get you on track with those very things, those very teachings that kind of the creator had meant for you. And as we build that, what happens? Well, they find strength. And then others around them begin to find strength. And then it becomes more and more stressful for the person who's using, because they now are having to live those dynamics, those effects of the substance use, as opposed to their family living. And so in that way, we engage the family in care, however they might come in.
So that shift, um, I like what you're saying about, you start with start with what you have.
Mhm.
And I love the way you said that, since instead of talking about who's not here, how about you are here. So how about we talk about you and going from there. So I love the way that you phrased all of that. Um, let's go to the next question. So, what are the signs in your work with families of healing? What are the signs that you look for that signal that the Native family is starting to heal?
Well, we see the emphasis shift,
Hmm.
particularly if there's substances involved or other family stressors, just chaos, crisis, you name it. Um, the priorities begin to shift from learning from having those very issues, whatever they might be, to having more of a learning environment amongst the family. So the exchange of knowledge begins to happen in a different way. It's not that there was an exchange of knowledge before. It's now wisdom. So that you begin to see a transfer happen of the way things are communicated. Love isn't communicated as something that is if you will, a weapon of holding people kind of emotionally hostage. But now it's a more genuine expression of the heart. Respect is shown differently from a demanding respect, you have to respect me, to a respect that is earned and maybe not even spoken. So it's shown through actions.
Hmm.
In many of the same ways, truth begins to shine within within the family. There's increased safety, and with that comes an ability to, in some ways, relax.
Hmm.
But we also think of that as being humble. It becomes a safer place to be humble without thinking that somehow you're going to be taken advantage of. All of these things set the stage for the family to now begin to re-engage in community healing. And so that's another part of this, is that the family will begin to involve themselves in any number of community healing activities, whether it be spiritual activities, tribal wellness communities, sports,
Hmm.
and other things that are life-giving to the family.
I really appreciate your talking about the shifts, that the signs you can see of a family healing have to do with shifts. And I'm sure that many of the clinicians and therapists that are on the call, or people who work closely with families, kind of resonate with what you're saying about the shifts, the emphasis shifts, the priorities shift. I especially like what you said about love shifting from hostage, kind of a taken hostage approach, out of anger and fear, probably, to genuine affection. And that whole shift of families from chaos to increased healthy involvement in all these different areas that every tribal community has, right? Every tribal community has basketball games, right? Or softball games, or, it doesn't have to be, a bevy of clinicians. There's all kinds of ways that can support that shift. So thank you for sharing that. So let's go to the next question.
Well, real importantly, before we leave that,
Sure.
the all of those things have to, those are kind of lessons of life or teachings that happen in families.
Mhm.
And it's in many ways, it's the way that it happens. How is it mentored? How is it coached? And so that way of mentoring begins to change from a very unconscious place where people are, basically, I don't have time to do this. I'm too bothered by all the things that are going on in my life, to a way that things are encouraged within the family. And that's really the essence of our resilience, isn't it?
Mhm.
That as we begin to grow the healthy parts of us, we then it begins to show within our families that we have ways of building that by supporting our children, by supporting the growth, and by supporting all those concepts of care.
That's a perfect segue to this question that's on the screen in our little campfire chat here of how do you use Native family strengths to rebuild the family? And I think you've started down that path already, so you may have more thoughts about that.
Much in the same way that you're, sitting around our campfire here, um, much in the same way that you build a fire, a sacred fire, you start with the embers that you have, and you build around it, you add things to it, you encourage it, you give prayer to it, you give attention to it. Many of those same attributes are the attributes that we use to strengthen our families. Oftentimes, usually through issues of post-trauma issues, intergenerational post-trauma issues, families will feel incredibly broken. They will also feel like somehow it's just something about their family that is never going to be successful, that they're always the ones that do something wrong or something, they cause havoc maybe in their community. We begin to change that strength from a new vision, which really harkens back to how they were meant to be as a family. And we begin to realize with them that, they actually come from a very strong people, a very strong family, and probably a very spiritual family, because families that have spiritual strength are also very spiritually sensitive. And families that are very spiritually sensitive are most impacted by traumatic events because of that sensitivity. And so they are the families that need the attention and the care. And once they can grow to give that to one another, then we really have some magical things happening within the family. Mm-hmm.
That is an incredibly perfect analogy about building a sacred fire and starting with the embers, starting with what you have and adding to it, and praying about the sacred fire. And that's just a wonderful analogy, Art. So thank you for that. Thank you for all of everything you're sharing. Your own, like a lot of people, I'm taking notes, right? I'm making a note of which question it is, number, and then I'm sitting here on my little post-its taking notes of what you're saying. Although we will all receive the recording, but I'm leaning in to our campfire here. I'm so intrigued by what you're saying. So so we talked about building, how do you use family strengths to rebuild the family? Let's go to the next question, which actually in our series today is our final question. Well, there's two questions. So this one is, can you share with us some innovative approaches that you've seen or been part of, or have resource information about innovative approaches that help families become whole again, Native families?
Yeah, we have actually there's a lot going on around the country that is focused around building family strength or rebuilding family strength. And there are, again, in building our strength of families, the advantage that we have is that we have a lot of our teachings to build that we can build upon. We work upon, we base that upon the strength that we have as a community and as families. And also we come together around our families. So one of the projects I've been involved in most recently is the My Two Aunties program, which we have worked with the Payankawichan people, of Rincon,
Mhm.
to develop and develop their model, which is a very culturally based model of care, where aunties come by to the home, or that people come by the office and see them one way or the other. And they have exchanges, cultural exchanges about strengths of families. So there's a lot of cultural teaching that goes on. A lot of teaching about how we were meant to be as a people, the skills of family, stories that they share, that they can then share with their children. In many ways, it's an auntie teaching the parents how to teach their children, and in some ways how to care. And interestingly enough, in this particular program, it was a program that was designed for high-risk families, for families that maybe were identified as high risk by providers, or maybe there was often a child welfare investigation of some sort going on with the family. And the aunties in this program approached them as, you know, we're not going to talk about all the things that got you here, but we are going to talk to you as your aunties. And you're part of us. So whether you're from this community or not, you're here now. And so you're part of our family, and we take care of our families. And so they grow that knowledge with the family. In that, what we found is that the referrals to the families coming in to provide, to receive services from the My Two Aunties program shifted, in that where they were being referred families that needed care, so to speak, now families were coming in the door saying, I want to be a part of this. I want to have the same kind of knowledge so that I can teach my children. And so they teach language, they teach many things. And so it's been a very successful program on many levels, but on a very important level, it is a program that families want to be a part of because they want to be strong families, as opposed to, we have a lot of problems, and so that's why we'll want to come in. There are many programs like that, but they all tend to share in common something very simple, and that is family strengthening. So as the family gets stronger, we have a community of people that then gathers around them to bring that strength. So there are many examples on there. I know you have a link to the Center for Native Child and Family Resource Resilience Center. Many of them are listed in that center and are available to be used by other communities. I encourage communities not particularly to take something and say, well, okay, here's the manual and we'll just use it. No, develop that same type of intervention for your own community based on your own ways.
That is a really fabulous resource of the the two aunties, and I resonates with me a lot because that's the role I play in my family is as an aunt, and I get tickled when I go to events and they have tent cards on names. If it's something from my family, my tent card always says Aunt Holly.
There you go.
So I totally like it. Well, this has been an incredibly wonderful campfire chat, and I can't thank you enough, my friend, for
you.
sharing all of your wonderful expertise. And I think we all would like to, if I need help, I want to go to Dr. Art Martinez, because I just love the way you think and the way you talk and your experience and your resources. And if we can go, we do have a resource slide for you all, which gives you reference information from our friend Terry Cross's Positive Ending Parenting, which I'll call a tribal parenting tune-up. The capacity building for tribes that Art referred to, which is a great resource, lots of information and models. The Native Men to Native Men is how I refer to Native Dads Network, one of my favorite organizations. The Old Minto Family Camp in Alaska is where families go for treatment. And then just a little bit on the post-traumatic stress. So where the resource of where that comes from. So I want to give you that. And I think with that, we go to the next slide and we are done with we can start, let the fire die out on its own, and we'll transition to our friend Livia.
Well, thank you so much, both of you. It was just a privilege to listen to you. We do have 3 questions that came into the chat box. And in the spirit of community of which we're part, we also had lots of folks answering some of those questions in the chat box. But the 3 questions are, overall, what does it mean to be a good relative? The second question is, how are some of the other reservations using peer support specialists when it comes to substance abusers, recovery, and mental health services? And then the last one was, how do you know when to keep hoping and when you finally have to ask someone to leave because of the psychological harm to the family? Now, I know that we won't be able to get to all these questions. I know that there are some answers provided, but I just wanted to highlight the 3 questions because, as we said and Holly shared in the beginning, we'll use these questions to inform our next session.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to also offer to both Dr. Martinez and Holly, if you want to answer any one of those questions in a minute or so, we can do that before turning it over to wrapping up the session.
So if any of those resonate with you, Art, we have like 2 minutes.
Well, they all resonate with me.
I know they all do.
We may want to start incorporate those into our next session. Particularly when we talk about, I'm going to try to rephrase what I heard because the families, there was a question about family strengthening. There's a second question, I believe. Maybe you could repeat that real quick.
How do you know when to keep hoping when you finally have to ask someone to leave because of the psychological harm to the family?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's time for someone to leave when they can't be a part of the family. And so rather than identifying someone as the problem and saying, when we identify someone as the problem, we're all focused around the problem, then the problem is the family, right? Because that's all we're talking about. When we say, we're going to work on the family, we're going to strengthen our family, we're going to make our family whole and healthy and vibrant within our community and our experiences of community, what will happen is that the person who's using maybe will their level of stress or the pressure upon them to do something to change the way that they do things will grow because they're being left behind. by the family change. So their family is growing in a way that doesn't involve them. So therefore the family is growing away from them. And that may be the best opportunity that they have to then change, because it'll be a test as to what's more important for them, their substance use or their family. And they will be threatened by it at some level. But I have seen many people in recovery who have said, I just had to choose to be a part of my family because they were right. That's what we should be doing. The changes that were happening were the changes I should be a part of. And so the other side of that being that if they choose their substance over the family, then it kind of wasn't going to work anyway, because they were too lost in their addiction. And maybe the separation of family is what will be needed for them to be able to find that care that they need.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for everything you've put in the chat. We've been able to see them as they come across. So it's been really enriching to hear your thoughts from your perspective, your communities, and we'll review all of that, and it'll help us design next month's time with Dr. Martinez. So I think we're ready to move to the next step of our session here.
Yes, just a reminder to fill out the survey that is in the chat right now. And it'll give us feedback, and you'll also receive your continuing education credit as well. Bernice, do you have anything else?
No, just kind of close it to the next slide and we'll just welcome them back. See you in June for that continuation of Dr. Martinez's second part of Healing Native Family Trauma Related to Drugs and Alcohol. And that's June 27th, 2023. So if you can stay on just for a few more minutes, we have one more music video and we can end for the day. Thanks, everybody.
And this music video is by Climbing Poetry. It's called We Survived.
Of Selma and Nagasaki, and we will survive Palestine. We survived Vietnam and Rwanda and Mississippi. The 50 stripes around our stars, 50 years to life behind their bars. We survived middle school and self-inflicted scars, losing our mothers to our fathers' hands. We survived slavery and genocide, came back from the dead and spread like wildfire. The ghetto, the concrete police beatings, the screams and the echoes, the cutbacks, the evictions, the droughts and the prisons, Jim Crow and gas chambers for warfare and lynching. The seeds from our strange fruit been sprinkled across this terrain by our angels. And everywhere we land, we're gonna take root. And every inch of rock, mud and sand, we're gonna break through. You're here right now. I'm seeing you with my own two eyes. Think of all the demons that tried to take you, and you still survive. And we will survive. annihilate our angels. We summon the strength of all those who came before us and all those coming. We must feel freedom in our fingers when the world gives us nothing but believing a new day is coming.
In my soul, I know we will. Everything's gonna be alright. Are rooting for us. We will survive. Everything's gonna be alright. We will survive. Our ancestors. Our ancestors.